Our translations play games, and it really, really annoys me. I do appreciate the Christians who have studied Greek, who have the capability of translating the New Testament Greek writings into English. We're all blessed for their ministry. But they also have a weighty responsibility, and that is to translate what it says and don't play games with the translation. But it's very hard for people to resist that. I've never translated, so maybe I would fall in the same pit if I were a translator. If you've never noticed the subject passage in Romans that we just read, one reason is that most Bible translations render this passage in such a way as to obscure Paul's message. Whereas Paul says in verse 6 that God will render to each man according to his works, today most Bible translations render this passage as he will render to each man according to his deeds. Now, deeds and works are one and the same thing. But theologically, see, we've been told works are bad. That's works righteousness. That's bad. No, your works don't matter. So where Paul says our works do matter, the translators put deeds in there, so we don't realize it's the same word. Theologically, the interchanging of these two words is both significant and it's purposeful. In the passage quoted in Ephesians, Paul uses the word ergon when he says not as a result of works. Ergon is normally translated works. When he says in Romans that God will render each man according to his works, he uses the identical word ergon. So here you see, once he says we are judged based on our works, the other he says we have been saved not based on our works. Similarly, in verse 7, Paul says that eternal life comes to those who persevere in good work. Yet most popular English translations render the phrase good work as well-doing. So when you render it, it says continuance in well-doing. Well-doing, what does that mean? And yet Paul uses that same word, ergon, work. I mean, it's so clear what it means. So the translators are not being spiritually honest. They shade that, so when you read Romans 2, you don't realize, okay, now here he's clearly saying we are going to be judged based on works. It will affect our salvation. So they take out works and they put these other words, and then in Romans 3 and 4 they put works, and then they can preach, see, works play no role in our salvation. That is deceptive. It is very, very wrong. So the English reader doesn't realize that Paul has made statements in chapter 2 that are verbally contradictory with statements he makes in chapters 3 and 4. Of course, his statements can be reconciled when we realize that in chapters 3 and 4, Paul is talking about the first phase of salvation. Chapter 2, he's talking about the second phase. So he knows what he's talking about. I mean, it's a verbal contradiction, but it's not a contradiction in ideas. Now, one of the reasons why the early Christians didn't fall into this trap is that they're reading it in the original Greek. So in every one of these places, they're seeing the same word, ergon, ergon, ergon. So they get it. Yeah, we see our translators playing these games and putting different words to be deceptive, I have to say. Origen, let the heretics hear, he's commenting on this very verse. Let the heretics hear that God pays back to each one, not on account of his nature. The Gnostics saying, if you have a saved nature, you're saved, that's it, your works don't matter. But on account of his works. In the second place, let believers be edified, or maybe be warned would be a better translation, so as to not entertain the thought that because they believe, this alone can suffice for them. On the contrary, they should know that God's righteous judgment pays back to each one according to his own works. We're going to be closing with these quotes. John Chrysostom, here Paul awakens those who had drawn back during trials, and he shows that it is not right to trust in faith alone, for that heavenly tribunal, that's Judgment Day, will also inquire into our works. Ambrosiaster, therefore those who seek eternal life are not merely those who believe correctly, but those who live correctly as well. Theodoret, we will be judged based on our works. After our baptism, we need to patiently persevere in good works. It is not sufficient to haphazardly do righteous deeds. Rather, the eternal blessings are reserved for those who are willing to undergo the difficulties of walking with God throughout their lives. It's not just a one-time thing, it's walking throughout our lives. Clement of Rome. This quote is significant because Clement wrote this probably the year 97, 98. I mean, this is right at the same time that the Apostle John was on earth. I mean, there's no gap in time. I mean, you go right from the New Testament to the uninspired writers, the people who came after the New Testament. Clement of Rome writes, "Let us therefore earnestly strive to be found in the number of those who wait for him, in order that we may share in his promised gifts. But how, beloved, will this be done? It will be done only by the following things. If our understanding is fixed by faith towards God, if we earnestly seek," there's no gap in there. It's just, I'm going from one slide to the other. "If we earnestly seek the things that are pleasing and acceptable to him, if we do the things that are in harmony with his blameless will, and if we follow the way of truth, casting away from us all unrighteousness and iniquity." Second Clement is the oldest sermon we have outside of the New Testament. We don't even know who gave it. It was preserved along with the letter from Clement of Rome, and so people attributed it to Clement. It could have been from him. It's certainly no older than, say, about the year 140 AD. It says, "For he is faithful who has promised that he will reward everyone according to his works. If therefore we shall do righteousness in the sight of God, we shall enter into his kingdom." Justin Martyr, "Each man goes to everlasting punishment or salvation according to the value of his actions." Hippolytus, "In administering the righteous judgment of the Father to everyone, Christ assigns to each person what is righteous according to his works. Those who have done good will be justly assigned eternal bliss. To the lovers of wickedness, there will be given eternal punishment." Now I realize this sounds like heresy to so many Christians today, and he's just restating what Jesus said. There is nothing different